Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Danny Kellogg. I am one of the financial advisors on the team here at Prosperion, and I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Dr. Mary McCall. And I'll introduce Mary and share a little bit more about her background in a moment, but wanted to highlight a couple housekeeping items as we kick things off. We are recording today's event, so there will be a replay link made available in case you want to revisit any portion of the conversation. And then, as you hopefully can see on the screen, we will also be conducting some question and answer portion at the end of today's event. And for compliance reasons, the way that we're going to facilitate that discussion is to ask that you email me throughout the presentation. So that's my email address up on the screen, danny.kellogg@lpl.com. So snap a picture of it, write it down, and just throughout the discussion, feel free to send emails my way, and then I will field them and have a discussion with Mary at the end of the call. She's also going to share her individual contact information in case anybody would like to get in touch with her regarding her coaching services or just with any questions that you might not feel comfortable bringing up in a group setting as well. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Mary, who I have known for many, many years. And prior to her coaching career, she had a very illustrious career as a professor, primarily in Northern California at St. Mary's in Moraga, but also had the opportunity to serve some international universities and with some international organizations as well. So she brings to this topic of values coaching and advanced care planning and late life planning, a depth of knowledge and years of experience, but also just a global perspective on how things go. So with that, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to put this event on, and we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Danny. And I'm really happy to be able to be here and share with all of you a little bit about my background and the kind of work that I do and why I do it, and to offer any kind of support that I can. So I'm really grateful to Danny and Prosperion for allowing this event to happen. So I'm going to talk about the work I do related to values-based decision-making and communication in middle and late life, and what I think of as this is a gift of clarity. February is our Valentine's month, and we think about gifts to our loved ones. And I really think that the gift of clarity around our values and our decisions and our communication with our loved ones is really important. Let's see. We know that life is full of challenging times, and many of us have faced or might face many of these situations. A person might be feeling scared of changing jobs or retiring because they don't really know what's important to them or what they'll do. So I retired from being a college professor 3.5 years ago, and my husband has also retired, and we've spent our time trying to figure out, Danny knows well what we want to do and how we want to do it and where we want to live and what's important to us. We've probably experienced a loved one having some kind of accident or illness. They may not be in the ICU, but if someone ends up in the ICU, if no one knows what they want or how to make decisions for them in an already painful and challenging situation, it makes it that much harder. Sometimes middle-aged parents think back on their lives and they regret maybe spending more time at work than with family. An older adult maybe doesn't know how to tell their family what they want in terms of housing or care or their finances or their end-of-life desires. And even more common in many, many families, someone receives a terminal diagnosis. And this is part of what I'm trying to help families work through. I have two friends, couples, one of whom just got diagnosed, one of them with Alzheimer's and the other with another degenerative disease, terminal disease. And it's really striking to me the difference between the two couples in terms of how one has talked all throughout their lives about their values and their shared values, and it's really made their decision-making so much easier than the other couple who haven't really had those conversations and now facing this dire situation are really struggling to figure out how can we proceed and what do we each need and how can we support each other through this difficult time. So today I'm going to share a little bit of my background and why I do what I do, the framework and approach I use, how it can be applied to decision-making in challenging times, and then also how we can use clear communication skills to share our value-based decisions with others who need to know those. I'm from a large Catholic family grounded in values around social justice and community and service. I went to college and then earned a PhD in human development and aging from UC San Francisco. And ironically, I was not interested in late life or aging, but during my graduate studies, my mother and her siblings had to deal with their mother's decline and various decisions and her ultimate death. And here I am studying all these things around aging, and I'm watching this happen in my family. And it really sensitized me to the need for how can families get support to deal with these difficult situations. I've also sadly lost 3 siblings and both parents in my family. I have 12 brothers and sisters. So you can imagine the discussions and challenges that probably came up there along the way. So I have lots of personal experience with these issues. And in the examples that I'll give you around communication, these are actual conversations that I've had. My career has mostly been in higher education. I was a college professor in developmental psychology with a specialty in aging. I've also done diversity and equity training, as I'm sharing with you, working with individuals and families around mid and late life issues and communication, advanced care and end of life planning, and then I have a whole other hat of research design and data analysis consulting. And then I've had the real privilege to be able to travel and be part of an international research group. So I've taught and consulted and done research in Japan and Sweden and Germany primarily, which has been really exciting and an amazing experience for me. But it also helped me come to this work because I realized by looking at other cultures, in the US, we don't really face aging well. And we don't help families think about and prepare for what might happen and how our values might come into play or conflict, especially if it has to do with change or decline or illness or death. I've learned from other cultures that there can be different ways to approach these challenging topics using a values-based approach. But we're also a culture that doesn't really help us learn about our values. We don't know how to make value-based decisions very clearly or very easily. So I think that one way to do this is through really reflecting on and being able to understand and articulate our values and those of others so that we can communicate about these different issues that we face in mid and late life. So my commitment is to help families and individuals prepare now so that a lot of pain and suffering and misunderstanding can be avoided in later situations that are already hard and challenging. So it doesn't take that element away. And a lot of this too is we know that these situations are often unexpected. We can make best laid plans, we know, don't always mean that that's the way things go. And so my experience shows me that being able to have these conversations also allow families and partners to pivot more easily in unexpected and changing situations. So what I do is assist individuals, partners, and families in clarifying and articulating their values around life issues and decisions, and then help people enhance and expand clear communication skills between them and those they wish to share those values and decisions with, such as families or doctors or caregivers, etc. And I can help guide and support the creation of individualized or family action plans for preparation and implementation of decisions around retirement or housing and care decisions, advanced care planning, or end of life. Why do I do this? A lot of it is grounded from my own family experience and my personal experience. I think supported by my professional education and my professional experience as well. But I want to see people being able to live their lives most fully as who they are authentically and in tune with their values, so that people can feel confident that they're making the most well-informed decisions they can at any given moment. And it doesn't mean, again, that we may not look back at a choice and say, well, if I had known then what I know now, but all we can do is be as informed as we can at the moment. And also, as I said, so that individuals and partners and families can avoid painful interactions, relationships, and decision-making points in difficult or unexpected times. And really, ultimately, so that people can have a sense of peace with their decisions and their communication about those decisions to others, and really be able to feel like I've lived my values, I've communicated those, and I can be at peace with the choices I've made. The framework and approach I use was developed by Brian Hall and Benjamin Tona, who, and I'll introduce their framework in a second. But Brian said, values are the ideals that give significance to our lives, that may be reflected through the priorities we choose, and that we hopefully act on consistently and repeatedly. Their framework they developed around these 4 worldviews. And they said that our values come from our worldviews, and worldviews and therefore values differ because they come from life experiences, right? Which are different across people, depending on our family, our friends, our society, our culture, our gender, our age, our race or ethnicity, our social class, our religion or spirituality. I mean, lots and lots of factors, right, that go into what has shaped us and what has shaped our worldview, and therefore they say what shapes our values. So they created this kind of map of worldviews and values that I use in my work. And they talk about 4 different worldviews. So the first is kind of surviving, where people see the world as a mystery over which they have no control. So you can think about in situations where we don't really feel like we have any control, we kind of want to hunker down and just like, let me survive and get through this situation. So that's going to influence our values and what we choose to prioritize. Another worldview is based in a sense of belonging, where the world is a situation with which I must cope, but I can cope, and part of the way I cope is by creating relationships and having a sense of belonging to others, maybe to institutions, the organizations that we work in. Another worldview they called self-initiating, where people see the world as a creative project in which they want to participate. So there's a lot more kind of external creative energy going on in this worldview. And the final one they talk about, they called interdependent, where they say the worldview is that the world is a mystery for which we must care on a global scale. So this is a very small portion of their map, just to give you a sense of how this connects. So in surviving worldview, our values might be around safety and security. So I may look across my life and say, well, I want to have financial security. That's going to make me feel like, okay, I can survive what's going to come in the future. I may want physical security. So I want to be in a place where I feel physically safe. That may have to do with where I want to live, or how much security I have around my house. I may want to change the environment in which I live in so that I feel safe and secure. And I'll be seeking reassurance from people around me. In a belonging worldview, a major value is that of connection. So I'm going to value family and friends, the connections I make through the organizations that I'm connected to. I'm going to seek a sense of recognition and a sense of value from other people. And play might be a really important value because that's a way I connect with people. And an important value would be loyalty and fidelity to those to whom I'm connected and feel a sense of belonging. In a self-initiating worldview, values are around this proactive participation. So I may be looking for, how can I serve people? What's my vocation? What am I being called to do in the world? How can I be my most genuine self? How can I grow in new ways? How can I assert myself? How can I build trust with other people? And at the interdependent worldview, the values center around care and community. So I may have values related to global concerns, maybe global poverty, water safety, peace, and experience a sense of interdependence. So how am I connected to the people in Turkey who just experienced the earthquake? How am I interdependent with nature? That people might seek the values of truth and wisdom about the human experience, looking for some spiritual understanding, develop a sense of transcendence. I'm part of something bigger than myself, and maybe a value around human rights and justice. So these are just some examples, and everybody's different around what values they enact in their life, given their worldview. And it's not that anybody's just in one worldview, and we can also move back and forth. Often in times of crisis, we may go back to the surviving worldview, or that may kind of expand a bigger part of our psyche because we're just trying to get through. And so this can often happen when we get unexpected news or unexpected things happen. So Hall and Tona talked about values being either goal values or means values. Goal values, they say, are about how we want to be in the world, such as I want to be having a sense of security. I want to feel a sense of security. Or I want to be in balance between intimacy and solitude with others. Some values are means values that they talk about, which are the ways in which are the skills we need to achieve these goal values. So to have a sense of security, I might want to have safe and predictable financial resources. To feel that I'm in balance of intimacy and solitude with others, I may need a value at some point in my life of making time for solitude in my life because I feel a little bit out of balance. So I think this is a really helpful way to think about, how do I want to be in the world? And then what is it that I need to do in order to be able to be that way? So how do we do this work? We reflect on our values, right? Asking questions like, what values do I want to live my life by? What values would I be proud to see expressed in my family and relationships? I think for me, my parents were really, really clear and articulate about what values were most important to them. And they shared with us as kids how they made decisions about where money went, where we went to school, why we had the experiences we had, because those were reflective of their values and the values they wanted to see expressed in their family. What values would I be proud to see exercised in roles such as work, or as a volunteer, or as a friend? As I said, what I showed you before is a very small piece. There are 125 values in the Hall-Tona model. So there's lots and lots of things that people prioritize. And certainly when I got trained in this, things I had never thought about that could be a value for people. And their work is based in international research. So many, many different cultures participated in helping them develop this framework. And then thinking about applying these to decision-making. So I think that in bringing our unconscious values to awareness through this process of identification and articulation, we can more clearly and intentionally make decisions that support and enact our values. And it doesn't mean that different values might not be at play, or we might not feel like they're kind of in conflict with each other. Like, I want the best care for my mother, but I also maybe have some financial constraints there. So those are both important values, but being able to articulate them can really help say, okay, so this is realistically what's available, and what's the best care within that context. As I said, this approach to values is really applicable in any culture. And we have to be aware that there's variation in values, both goal values and means values across cultures and even within cultures. Obviously, even within the US, there's a lot of variation among individuals and partners and families. So here's one example. A couple's trying to decide what they want to do in retirement, and they have different ideas about how they're going to spend their time and their money. One partner is concerned about long-term potential expenses for healthcare, while the other one says, hey, let's have fun while we still can. We'll just deal with that later, right? So how can they articulate their values and common priorities? How can they learn about their goal values and then figure out their means values in meeting those goals, both individually and collectively? And these are conversations that my husband and I continue to have on a weekly basis as we're navigating our retirement, early retirement together. Here's another example. A man has a wife with dementia, and he can no longer care for her in their home because of his own health challenges. Not an uncommon situation. Even though she says to him, promise me you won't ever leave me. So how might we advise this man? What might be his goal values and what could be his means values to supporting that goal? So these are important conversations, because in this situation, this man that I worked with, he was in agony over trying to decide, right? When it was clear, if he didn't take care of his own health, he would end up in the hospital and his wife was going to end up somewhere else anyway. So these could be really difficult and challenging situations. And of course, we have conflicting values in families. As I shared, I have 12 brothers and sisters. So you can imagine the conversations we might have had around my brothers who were terminally ill, my dad who had cancer and dementia, my mother who passed away. So we need to acknowledge and articulate these differences and understand that it's likely not everybody is going to be completely satisfied with any specific outcome, but hopefully they're willing to accept it after conversations and understanding. And we need to take into account within our families or across families, cultural or religious or spiritual variations and values and approaches to family communication and decision-making. So in some cultures, adult sons are in charge. They're the ones who are making the decisions. In some other cultures, older people are not even told the truth about their medical situation. That's, everybody agrees they don't need to know. So once we've clarified and articulated our values and perhaps made decisions, how do we now have these healthy and productive and meaningful, all these ideals, conversations with each other about these? I think we all know the importance of effective communication. It sets a tone for how you're going to interact with people. It sends messages about respect or disrespect. And it can prevent or create problems, and it can build or undermine trust and fairness. But we do know that miscommunication leads to misunderstanding, which can lead to mistrust. And then really we're spending time dealing with that issue and not the real issues at hand. Families make a lot of decisions. They can be instrumental, such as money or health, kind of basic survival factors. They can be affective around feelings and emotions, belonging factors, social related to relationships or activities, or economic, who's going to get money, who's going to work, how is it going to be spent, and then technical decisions, which are the smaller decisions to carry out a larger decision. So mom needs help. Okay, so who's, Danny, you going to shop? I'm going to cook. Are you going to cook? Am I going to shop? So families have to work through these technical decisions as well. And families can use a variety of decision-making processes, ranging from familiar approaches that they use over and over, or to more varied or flexible approaches, depending on the type of the decision, their emotional state, and who might be involved in the decision-making process. So I'll share some communication tips. My approach is very practical and individualized. What's your situation? Where's your challenge? I have communication worksheets that people can use. I can help write scripts for people because I'm very practical about what is it that works for you in your context. So we've all heard, okay, number one communication tip, use I statements, right? I think we've all heard this. So of course, the intention here is that I speak from my perspective only and don't speak for anybody else. And I take ownership of what I'm saying, not blaming other people, etc. So I'm just going to give you some examples. And again, these are all examples that I've actually used myself. So my dad made me his power of attorney for healthcare. He had cancer and he had dementia. In the early stages of dementia, he could have this conversation. So I said, Dad, I'm wondering if we could right now or at some point in the near future have a conversation about your final wishes for extraordinary care. I'm afraid that if we have to face that situation without having had any conversation about it, I would not be able to know how you feel about those decisions that I might have to make. So I'm concerned that I might make some decisions that you wouldn't want. So it would be really helpful to me to hear your thoughts and feelings about these issues. We don't have to talk right now, but I would appreciate it if we could at some point soon. And he said, okay, well, I trust you. I don't need to have this conversation. Okay, Dad, thanks, I guess. That doesn't really clarify things for me. So I could revisit this conversation. I did revisit this conversation several times with him. And he said, no, I trust you. I'm going to be unconscious. So whatever you think is best, that's good enough for me. And I had to just accept that because I was his power of attorney and that was as much as he was going to give me. Sister or brother, I've had this conversation many, many times. I need to talk with you about what's going on with mom and dad. I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed with what's going on. And I'm wondering if you could talk with me about what kinds of things you might be able to do to help out at some point. Is now a good time? Or if not, can we schedule a time to talk soon? So I'm just saying, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm asking. Can we have this conversation now? Or if not now, when? Or another ask. I need to talk with you about what's going on with mom or dad. I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed with what's going on, and I just need someone to listen while I vent a bit. I don't need you to necessarily say or do anything particular at this time, but just listen. I would really appreciate that. Is that okay? Again, being clear about what's going on with me and what I'm asking. And don't be afraid to write out your script. I had a really good open relationship with my dad and could talk to him about anything. My mother, sometimes a little bit more challenging, and I'd even write out, okay, this is what I need to say to her so that I don't get caught off guard in the moment. But I know, okay, I have this kind of format I can follow and write it out, which I find really helpful. Asking clarifying questions. Mom, it's important to me to make sure I understand what you're saying, so I'd like to reflect back or tell you what I think I heard you saying. I heard you say that you were feeling really overwhelmed with your life right now, and also that it's really hard right now to exactly specify what's overwhelming you, but you just can't handle all the little things that seem to come up every day. Is that right? So this way, I'm clear about what I'm hearing, right? First, I want to be clear about what I'm communicating, but I also need to be clear about what I'm hearing. Sister, brother, so what I hear you saying is that right now you don't have time in your schedule to visit mom and dad twice a month, but you could do a visit once a month and you're willing and able to call them once a week on Tuesdays between visits. Is that your understanding as well? So again, okay, now Danny and I were clear about who's doing what, and I can come back in a month and say, hey, remember that conversation where we had that agreement, Danny, that you haven't been calling mom and dad, and it would be really helpful. So really being clear, specific, summarizing, people ending up on the same page can really help. This is a lot of text, but this is kind of my top 10 general communication strategies that I have used myself a lot, using I statements, stating the topic you want to discuss and why using I statements, asking if this is a good time to talk about this topic, or ask when you could schedule a time to do so. Be clear about my concerns and that they're mine. They may not be your concerns, but they're mine. Be clear about what you're asking of someone, and be prepared for them to say no, or to offer something other than you were hoping for. If they're asking something of you, not being afraid to say, I might have to think about that for a while, or, can I get back to you on that? I'll call you back, talk to you tomorrow, or whenever, but a specific time to check in. Always end by asking the other person if there's anything else that they'd like you to know about the topic or the issue. And if need be, schedule another specific time to continue or start the conversation. Thank the person for having the conversation with you. And then always at the end, take a deep breath and give yourself credit for having a good, or at least a better maybe conversation with this person than maybe you had last time. So none of this works perfectly, but I think it's really important for us to give ourselves credit, like, okay, I tried, it got derailed at number 6, but at least I got to 6. And then we'll try to get to 6 through 9 next time. And if you don't get what you want from the conversation, these are the things I have to remind myself. Don't blame the other person. I try to not be attached to what the outcome might be from a conversation. I need to focus on what it is that I need to communicate to someone else. Try to be clear if I'm asking something of them, or being clear what they may be asking of me. If I'm asking something of them, being prepared for them to say no. People get to say no. And practice going through those feelings of disappointment or anger or resentment, etc. And maybe plan a follow-up conversation where you express your feelings with I statements. So out of the remaining 9 kids in my family, living children in my family, was the main caregiver along with one sister for my parents. So I had a lot of feelings of disappointment, anger, and resentment when I felt like my siblings were not stepping up. But I also recognize that they have different lives than I have, they have different priorities, and they get to say no. So I had to deal with those feelings myself, and that's fine. So just a couple final thoughts. These communication strategies really are kind of based on this Western ideal that we have of straightforward and open eye contact communication. And in some families and in some cultures, these approaches may not be appropriate. But there's lots of other strategies that can be employed within different cultural frames, different cultural contexts, different family systems, family roles, etc. So a clear understanding and acceptance of family roles and responsibilities and relationships, for me, must form the basis for any approach that I would take to family decision-making, whatever stage of life. And as I've said, these approaches and skills don't guarantee 100% prevention of difficulty and struggle at times, but I do know that they can alleviate some of the stress that people feel in those situations. So we've talked about potential future webinar topics if people are interested, housing or care options, kind of the wide range of housing options for mid or late life, and care options, how people make decisions about those, financial, legal, and medical decisions and communication, advanced care planning and end-of-life values and decisions, and family dynamics in dealing with strong emotions, which most of our families elicit in one way or another. So as Danny said, if you have questions, you can email him right now. And again, this is just kind of my one-liner. I work with individuals, partners, and families to guide and support them through any or all of these processes and skill building. And there's my contact info. So thank you for your time and attention. And I would love to hear any questions or comments that you have.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mary. That was fantastic and a whole lot of great information and skills. So thank you. You make it sound so easy, but I'm just feeling that there's years and years of awkward family discussions that have led to
Yes.
this profession and that skills that you've built up. So
I should have added that the number one skill is being able to sit with discomfort through all of this.
there you go. I'm sure. Well, good. And we appreciate you using all of that life knowledge and experience to share it with us and hopefully allow all of us to have a little smoother conversations. And I love the way you phrase it at the start, that it's a gift that you're giving to your family and loved ones of clarity. And yeah, you know what? These conversations are going to be awkward, but let's get them out of the way now and hopefully bring, some skill sets to the forefront that help to navigate all that. So one thing I was wondering is you went through it, you mentioned all the 125 values that the Hall Tana model lists out. Are there any resources or websites or worksheets that you're aware of that folks could go to kind of explore that Hall Tana model a little further and maybe dive into and see, okay, what are the values that are part of that model, and might even learn for themselves some new values or a way to articulate a value that they've felt but didn't know how to communicate. So are there any good resources for just diving further into that model?
Yes, there's a great book by Brian P. Hall called Values Shift.
Okay.
And that's where he kind of lays out this model, and he goes through it in a lot of detail, and he goes back and forth because they developed both an individual values model, but also a way in which organizations reflect and enact their values. And so Values Shift is the work that they've done both at the individual and the organizational level to help people and organizations reflect on, where are we right now? Are we in alignment with the values that we profess? And how can we shift, right, to really living in alignment? You can Google Hall Tana values and you'll get pictures of the whole map up there. To do the actual assessment of it, which is online, you can go to valuestech.com. It's valuestechnology.inc or Values Technology Incorporated. And that's the company that does the online assessment.
Nice. Yeah, that seems like a great exercise that I'm sure would be applicable not just one time in life, but as you transition through those different phases that you mentioned, where whether it's being mid-career and facing that tug of war between providing for your family and spending time with your family, and being able to help identify those values, or as you've experienced the last couple of years, how do I transition from my primary career to what's next in life, and how do I want to design that and still find purpose in what I'm doing.
Right. There are also lots and lots of values inventories that you can Google online. I have a whole library of them that I work with that people can look at and take, that are really good. They're much shorter than the Hall Tana, and they don't require, kind of this certified values-based coach to go through the Hall Tana model with you. But there's lots of sheets that people can download and they can use as a starting point for a conversation with children, partners, parents, friends, coworkers. So there's lots of resources out there.
Perfect. So a question we have here is, in your work and experience, what would you say has surprised you the most? And just talking to people, what situation are people least prepared for or haven't quite thought through and catches them off guard, right? So we can talk about, okay, well, if mom or dad is aging and we can see kind of the, health issues coming on, and that forces you to start having those conversations. Has there been anything that's kind of surprised you? It's like, well, I thought people would be prepared for this, but they didn't really anticipate this type of situation coming up or reaction to a situation. What's been surprising to you in your life?
That's a great question. I think even more fundamentally than a particular situation is that I'm really surprised, even talking to my friends, when they, kind of have gotten to know the work I'm doing, is to say, wow, I don't even know if I could sit down and articulate what my values are. I say my family is important. I say my kids are important. But then why is all my time at my job that I'm unhappy with? I say my health is important, but I don't really do the stuff that I should be doing. So I think, and I really give a lot of credit to my parents, as I said, who were so clear and able to articulate their values, and how it shaped the decisions they made for us as a family, that I'm just surprised that people don't know their values more clearly. And so they often feel buffeted by, oh, my boss wants this, and oh, social media tells me this, and oh, society is pressuring me on this. And, my kids are asking me for this, my kids want me to do this. And people feel, I think, lost in a sense, right? There's just so much going on in society today, and lives are super complicated. And my dad said to me once, which I've always kept in mind, is he said, you know what, once you know what your values are, then this is most important. So anything that's coming up, I know what's most important. I can make that decision because I'm clear about what my priority is. And so I see my friends with young adult children, and some younger friends who have small children like you, Danny, right, who struggle with what's the right decision. And well, what are my friends saying? What are social media saying? What's Facebook saying? I said, well, what do I and my family, what's most important to us? But there's so much pressure that it's really hard to find the quiet time to sit down and sit, because these things take reflection. So I think more than any particular situation, it's that kind of fundamental, do I really know what's most important and how I make decisions based on those values? But I would say that I have been in and heard about too many families who are arguing in an ICU over what should happen and who wants what, because they've never had the conversation. And that is hard on everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's doing that work to understand what they are, but then equally as important to communicate it. Because I would imagine there's a lot of folks that feel very close to family members. You felt very close to your dad, like you could have any conversation. And his response to you was, I trust you, do whatever you want. And that's almost a burden on you in some sense. So being able to use these tools to communicate that probably helps you learn a lot about those people in your life that are really important to you, but you may not have had this level of conversation with them.
Right. And in contrast, my mother had everything written out that she wanted about the end of her life. So I was like, okay, thanks, Mom. That's super helpful.
See, your dad just thought that she took care of it all for him. It's like, she's worried about it, so I don't need to.
Right.
Well, good. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. So I want to certainly be respectful of your time and everyone else's time. So again, thank you, Mary, for taking the time to walk us through this. And I look forward to building on this framework and applying it to those more specific topics in future events and webinars. So certainly open to everyone's feedback about what would be most intriguing of those topics that Mary outlined.
Yeah, I really encourage anybody who's listening to reach out to Danny and let him know if there's particular topics that you're interested in.